Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on something we all use every single day, but maybe don't think about too much: network security. We're going to demystify that incredibly complex web of rules, threats, and defenses that, keeps our digital world from falling apart. So, what's really keeping your data safe online? Let's dive in and find out. Seriously, think about that for a second. Every time you send an email, buy something online, or just stream a show, there's this massive, invisible system working overtime to protect you. But what is that system exactly? What are all the pieces? Well, that's what we're here to break down today. All right, so to kick things off, we have to understand how all of our devices even talk to each other in the first place. The best way to think about it is like a giant global postal service. For a letter to get from you to a friend on the other side of the planet, there has to be a shared set of rules, right? Things like addresses, zip codes, and mail routes. The digital world? It's pretty much the same deal. At the very heart of all this communication is a kind of universal rulebook called the OSI model. Now, it sounds complicated, but it's really just a framework that takes the huge job of sending data across a network and breaks it down into 7 smaller, much more manageable layers. Each layer has one very specific job to do, and they all stack on top of each other to make sure your message gets where it's going, safe and sound. Now I know, as 7 layers can be a lot to keep in your head, so let's just simplify it with that postal service idea. So the journey begins with the physical connection. Think of this as the actual mail trucks and the roads they drive on. Then you've got data routing, which is basically the sorting center, using zip codes to get the data packet headed in the right direction. Next up is ensuring delivery, which is like using registered mail with tracking to make sure nothing gets lost. And finally, you get to the application, which is you opening the letter and actually reading it. See? Not so bad.
Okay, so here's a really important distinction. While that 7-layer OSI model is the perfect theoretical blueprint for how a network should work, the internet that we all actually use every day, it runs on a more streamlined, practical version called the TCP/IP model. It basically combines some of those OSI layers into a 4-layer structure that just gets the job done more efficiently. It's the real-world application of the blueprint.
And just like every house on your street needs a unique mailing address, every single device connected to the internet, your phone, your laptop, your smart fridge, you name it, it needs a unique identifier. And we call that its IP, or Internet Protocol Address. And this chart really just puts the insane growth of the internet into perspective. The original system, which was called IPv4, gave us about 4.3 billion addresses. Back then, that sounded like an infinite number. But with the explosion of smartphones and all sorts of connected devices, we were literally running out. That's why we had to upgrade to IPv6, which provides a number of addresses so mind-bogglingly huge, it's hard to even write down. Trust me, we are not going to run out of those anytime soon.
Okay, so now that we know the rules of the road, let's talk about the people who are constantly trying to break them. Because for every rule and for every system, you can bet there's someone out there trying to find a loophole. This brings us to the villains of our digital story, the cyber attacks. So, first up, we've got the classic virus. Just like a real-world virus, it needs a host to survive, in this case, a file. And crucially, it needs you to do something to spread it, like clicking on a shady link or opening an attachment you shouldn't have. Once it's in, that's when it starts to do its dirty work. Now, a worm is a totally different kind of beast. It's a standalone piece of malware, and what makes it so incredibly dangerous is that it's self-replicating. It doesn't need any help from a human. It can just crawl across a network all by itself, infecting machine after machine after machine.
And then we have the Trojan. And yeah, it is named after the Trojan horse for a very good reason. It tricks you by disguising itself as something you actually want, a free piece of software, a cool new game. But once you willingly invite it inside your digital walls, it opens up a secret backdoor for attackers to just waltz right in.
And the list goes on, believe me. This table just shows how creative attackers can get. You've got denial of service attacks, which are all about just shutting a website down by flooding it with junk traffic. Then there are man-in-the-middle attacks that secretly listen in on your conversations. SQL injections that go right for the database to steal information. And maybe the most clever of all, social engineering, which completely ignores the technology and just targets people. And that really brings us to a fundamental, kind of scary truth about cybersecurity. You can build the most advanced digital fortress in the world with all the latest and greatest tech, but the weakest link is often us. It's human nature.
I mean, why spend months trying to crack a super complex encryption when you can just trick someone into telling you their password? So, how do we fight back against this whole rogues gallery of threats? Well, we build a fortress. And now it's time to meet the heroes of our story, the tools and the strategies of network defense. You know, the core philosophy behind modern security is this idea called defense in depth. It's actually a pretty simple but incredibly powerful concept. Never, ever rely on just one single defense. Instead, you build layers of security, one on top of the other. Just like a medieval castle, you've got the moat, then you've got the high walls, then watchtowers, then the guards. If an attacker somehow gets past one layer, there's always another one waiting for them. So, let's talk about one of your first and most fundamental layers, the firewall. The absolute best way to think of a firewall is like a bouncer at a really exclusive club. It stands right at the main entrance to your network, and it checks the ID of every little piece of data trying to get in or out. It compares it against a guest list of rules, and if your name's not down, you're not coming in. Simple as that. Okay, so there's a really important distinction to make here, and it's all about spotting a problem versus actively stopping it. An intrusion detection system, or IDS, that's like your network's alarm system. It sees something suspicious, and it screams, "Hey, something's wrong!" But an intrusion prevention system, or IPS, that's the security guard who hears the alarm, runs over, and actually stops the bad guy in their tracks. One warns you, the other takes action. So we have all these defenses, but where do we actually build our digital fortress? Where does all this data and all this hardware actually live? Well, broadly speaking, you've got two main choices. You can build it all yourself, which we call on-premises, or you can basically rent space from someone else, which we all know is the cloud. Let's break it down like this. On-premises is like owning your very own castle. You have complete total control over every single wall, every door, and every guard. But, and this is a big but, you are also responsible for everything, from the physical security right down to paying the power bill. The cloud, on the other hand, is kind of like renting a suite in a super high-tech fortress. You get amazing flexibility and resources you could never afford on your own, but you're also trusting your landlord to handle the really foundational security. And if you do decide to build your own castle, wow, the list of things you're responsible for is long and really complex. We're talking about uninterruptible power supplies for when the power goes out, physically secure buildings, very precise climate control systems so your servers don't overheat, multiple internet links so you're never cut off. The list goes on and on. Now, when you decide to go with the cloud, there are different levels of service you can pick. At the most basic level, you have infrastructure as a service, or IaaS. Think of that as renting the raw land and the building materials. A step up from that is platform as a service, PaaS, which is like renting a fully equipped workshop with all the tools you need included. And at the very top, you have software as a service, SaaS. That's like moving into a fully furnished apartment. You just log in and start using it. Think Google Docs or Office 365. So, how do you actually make sure your cloud landlord is holding up their end of the security bargain? Well, that's where something called a service level agreement, or SLA, comes in. This is the crucial formal contract that spells out exactly what the provider is promising. Things like how often their service will be online, how fast it will be, and most importantly, who is responsible for what when it comes to keeping your stuff secure. And this all brings us to our final, and maybe the most important point of all. You can't just go out and buy a security product, install it, and then dust off your hands and say, "Job done." Security isn't a product you can buy. It's not a destination you arrive at. It's a process. It's a constant, ongoing battle, because the threats are always changing, which means our defenses have to change right along with them. Which leaves us with one last question to think about. We've built these incredible digital worlds on a foundation of shared rules, and we defend them with these layered fortresses, both on our own property and in the cloud. But as technology just keeps accelerating and our lives become even more digital, what comes next? What will the great digital fortress of the future even look like?